Let's discuss what Kriya Yoga meditation does, or the purpose of it is for the everyday person in this current era, the average individual. Recently, in the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship course, the year 1 section, we've been nearing the end of our exploration and commentary on the Bhagavad Gita as it relates to a Kriya Yoga text. And in that text, the allegory starts describing a war between two factions. And rather than trying to summarize what's taken well over 20 hours to get into over the course of many months, basically, we'll paraphrase or condense it. The idea is that when you start on your spiritual path, you have a false sense of self, or ideas about who you are, why you are the way you are, who made you, who your relatives are, what's important to you, what sustained you through life so far. And in this allegory of the Gita, the idea of the war comes in because for a person on a spiritual path aiming to wake up, they can't just do things as they've always done them. They have to, in a sense, attack and destroy those self-defeating tendencies which keep one locked in an idea of being a small self, someone separate from God. And so that's why in the Gita, the description of certain heroes are actually related to certain chakras within the spine. The idea that by focusing on enlivening those chakra energies and meditating on them, you strengthen that soul force, that clarifying soul force, which helps to better allow you to understand what you are and what life is all about. And this is couched in the idea of a war, an allegory of a war in the Gita. Now, one of the students from the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship wrote to me in response to some of the homework that I had assigned them to contemplate as we were going through the Gita. And at the end of her email, she said the following. She said, "I figured that the gift of yoga is simply about shifting our way towards having the guts to face life with all it brings and embracing it with love." So let me say that again. Listen. I figured that the gift of yoga is simply about shifting our way towards having the guts to face life with all it brings and embracing it with love. And we can tie this back to the Gita, because in the Gita, one of the difficulties that Arjuna, who's represents us, those people who are stepping on the spiritual path, comes up against, is that in the beginning he doesn't have the guts to fight the battle to win his spiritual freedom, to find and seek out the grace to realize his spiritual freedom. So we see that on the spiritual perspective, but all too often people interested in meditation and spirituality, they try to escape their life, not realizing or understanding that life itself is a spiritual practice. And just like we don't go to the gym to exercise, to strengthen our bodies so that we can keep going to the gym 24 hours a day, we go to the gym so our bodies are strong, our bodies are as strong as they can be, genetically speaking, so that we can handle our lives, so that we can live our lives, so that we can fulfill the adventure of our lives, of this idea of God flowing through us. And the same is true with meditation and yoga practice. It's true all our life is yoga practice. That's why in the Yoga Sutras we have the yamas and the niyamas, or the ideas of how to live, right living. But we don't meditate, we don't practice Kriya Yoga simply to keep sitting cross-legged and cross-eyed in a corner in a room away from people. There will come a time when you won't need to be around people anymore, when the body will fall away and you'll be free of all that. But before that, there's a reason that this whole experience exists. And that is to express a little bit of divinity through our own personality and our nervous system, and to realize that there is no separation between the active life and the inactive life. And that our Kriya Yoga practice, our meditation practice, it's not meant to just be the thing we solely focus on. It's meant, as this Kriya Yoga student said, I figured that the gift of yoga is simply about shifting our way towards having the guts to face life with all it brings and embracing it with love. Now, maybe that doesn't sound very romantic, but it's more accurate than a lot of definitions I've heard. And it's easy for us to get drawn into the stories, the miraculous, fantastic stories that we hear from the 1 in a billion person. And whether they're accurate or true or not, we don't know. We just have to take their word for it. But we also have to realize the value of those stories. Remember, maybe if you were raised in Western culture when you were a child, maybe your parents told you about Santa Claus, this jolly old man who every Christmas comes around, brings you toys if you've been good. Now, as children, we need that story. Well, not all of us, but many of us need that story. Many of us need that story to help us be good and listen to our parents and be the best children we can be. The same is true for many of these fantastic stories that we read. I would love to speak to some of these people that such fantastic stories have been attributed to, because my sense is they'd probably wave a lot of them away. But there's a reason we have these stories. There is a reason that we have all this fantastic romanticism around yoga practice, because many of you aren't going to do any of this stuff unless you've got a really big carrot at the end of your stick. And that's what these stories are. So it is okay to have these stories if that is what inspires you, if that is what draws you forward. But we're at a time now, we're in an age, we're in an era where we can hopefully as adults take responsibility for our path and the cultivation of our mind and our body, our nervous system, and our states of consciousness, to realize and get a sense of what is true about God, our relationship to God, and the wholeness of life. And through that process, we might get shaken up a little bit, because we have to let go of things which no longer serve us. And so rather, at least the point of all this, rather than seeing yoga and meditation as escape and as something fantastic that you've read about in a book or you heard someone talk about third person, really take a look at your life. And what is so uncomfortable about aiming to find, realize, accept, appreciate God, divine consciousness in your everyday life? What is so hard and so difficult about embracing the trials, the beauty, the love, the joy, the difficulties, the sorrow, the loss, as just simply facets of God and divine consciousness? Now, I know why it's so hard. I've been alive long enough so far that I've experienced some difficulties, and so I know why it's painful, and I know why we seek escape. But I'd like to encourage you to realize that, or listen, when I say that by trying to find a way to embrace life with its joys, with its hardships, with its birth and its death, with those things which we think are unthinkable, unbelievable, unfathomable, if we can find a way to trust God in all of that, and I know how that sounds, to some of you this will be very easy, but to others, this might be something that you've wrestled with most of your life. Maybe you're wrestling with it now. But in this way, consider treating your meditation practice, your Kriya Yoga practice, as an anchor to bathe yourself, your mind, your consciousness, your nervous system, your body daily in faith, in grace, in surrender, in openness to life. At the end of your meditations, spend some time in prayer. If you're in a very difficult situation, many of you are, because that's the nature of being in this world, pray for strength, for faith, for peace, for hope, for clarity throughout whatever trial you have to go through. This was very important for my wife and I as she transitioned this past year. Even when they had sent her home and told her there was nothing else that could be done, she was adamant. And remember, she was a Kriya Yogi as long as I have been, maybe a year less. She was very dedicated to the practice, and this whole work was extremely important to her. And the process itself, even though she transitioned and she passed, allowed her to be liberated at the end. But back to the point, this idea of prayer, even towards the end, when there was really nothing else that could be done, we knew she was dying. She was adamant about praying together in the morning and at night. And while it wasn't healing her body, the sense of joy and peace and love and presence that came through that prayer was indescribable, was invaluable. Why? Because it brought home the idea of what real healing is about. And maybe I'll talk about this at another time. But I just wanted to share this so you understand that even in the darkest and most difficult situations, or what's perceived to be dark and difficult at times, continuing with your meditation practice, continuing with a prayer practice, trying to find a way through it to let that be your light, no matter what the body has to do or what changes have to occur in your life. This is the value of Kriya Yoga meditation for many people. And in that, the realization of God, the realization of oneness, the realization of clarity, underneath all the transience, underneath all the ups and downs of life, that's where the real freedom comes into play here. So I want to encourage you to quit seeking, escaping into an immortal body. And many of you aren't doing that. I realize many who watch this channel don't have that delusion. Quit trying to seek that perfect state of bliss and heaven on earth in this world. And look for God, divine consciousness, as the thread through everything. And tying this back to the Gita, I believe it was the chapter on divine manifestations, as we discussed this in the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship. It's in that text where it is described, God, the supreme consciousness, is the destroyer of even the greatest heroes, the destroyer of even the greatest heroes. So it goes on to sort of express that not even these heroes that we think are great beings in this world, they're nothing to God. They are an aspect of God, but even they are devoured by God, just like time is devoured by God. So what we see is throughout the thread of this learning is that God, divine consciousness, is everything, and that our purpose, maybe your purpose, is to live our life drenched in that awareness. That's it, living our life drenched in that awareness. And in that, it becomes more obvious what God really is. And even if you need those stories of fantastic experiences from various saints and sages to get you going, there's nothing wrong with that. I needed that. Everyone I've known, mostly, whom I have met, who is doing well on the spiritual path, practicing Kriya Yoga, they all needed it at some point. And it's still very inspiring to go back and read, because it keeps you, again, drenched in, saturated with this potential experience of God, even if it's just a fantasy in your mind. But that allows it to translate into the everyday. And it is the everyday in which you realize liberation. It is within every moment that it is realized. not in something far off and far away. So again, I just want to reread this phrase, again from one of the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship students. I figured that the gift of yoga is simply about shifting our way towards having the guts to face life with all it brings and embracing it with love. And that becomes joyous too, having the guts to do something. And then from that, being able to embrace life with love. It's a very powerful way of living. And I would say that the side result of all that would be liberation of consciousness, spontaneous liberation of consciousness. So finally, I want to finish up with a poem, or part of a poem that was sent to me by one of my best friends. And I believe this is a poem by Tagore. There is no hope, no fear for you. There is no word, no whisper, no cry. There is no home, no bed of rest. There is only your pair of wings and the pathless sky. Bird, oh my bird, listen to me and do not close your wings.